We're ready to build a model of the macroeconomy, a model that shows us how prices, output, and the money supply are related to one another. What would a model of the macroeconomy look like? We know what a model of an individual market looks like. Say this is the market for onions. There's the demand curve that explains the behavior of people who buy onions. There's the supply curve that explains the behavior of people who sell onions. The buyers and the sellers get together in a market, and through the bidding mechanism, they establish an equilibrium price and quantity. That is, a price at which the quantity of onions demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. The market clears, the outcome is stable, and according to analysis in microeconomics, gains from trade are maximized under certain circumstances, and we can be very happy about the outcome. What does equilibrium look like in the market as a whole? That is the macroeconomy like the market for onions, or is it different in some fundamental way? The classical economists, that is the disciples of Adam Smith, believed that the macroeconomy worked just like the market for onions. It was like one big supply and demand apparatus interacting with prices and wages constantly adjusting to keep us in equilibrium. The way the classical economists saw the problem of the business cycle was as follows. That is, there's some wage that's established, and you can think of the wage as the price of labor. And at the going wage, there's a demand for labor, which represents the behavior of businesses. And there's a supply of labor, which represents the behavior of households. And if the wage is above the equilibrium wage, then what you wind up with is a larger quantity of labor supplied than the quantity demanded. And we call that excess supply of labor unemployment. Now, according to the classical economists, this period of unemployment is going to set in motion a bidding mechanism. That is, the workers who can't find employment at this wage will be willing to work for a slightly lower wage, and a bidding mechanism will kick in. Meanwhile, over here, as the wage begins to drop through this adjustment process, some businesses decide they want to hire labor that they weren't previously planning to hire. Rather than using machines or simply not producing at all, they will hire the workers as the wage falls. As the quantity demanded increases and the quantity of labor supplied decreases, we head for the point where quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. That is, the wage adjusts downward to eliminate unemployment. In the classical view of the world, unemployment was a disequilibrium phenomenon that would signal wages to drop, and as wages fall, unemployment would be resolved automatically, kind of like the way any excess supply is resolved in any well-functioning market. The classical economists also had a view of the way the macroeconomy worked. That is, anytime a business is producing output, by selling that output, they are creating income for the workers of that business, who can then use their income to buy the stuff that businesses are producing. You might say that supply creates its own demand. In fact, Jean-Baptiste Say said exactly this. This is Say's law, a kind of idea about equilibrium in the macroeconomy. That is, when businesses produce stuff, the stuff they produce and sell becomes the income of the workers who then turn around and buy the stuff. Everything that's produced automatically creates a market by generating income for the people who are the customers of the store. So if you take Say's law and you take the classical view of the way prices adjust to give us equilibrium, you can be pretty optimistic that the macroeconomy is going to adjust to a period of stability. That is, the macroeconomy is self-adjusting. Wages and prices adjust to clear up problems like unemployment. Well, the classical view of the world was threatened and eventually laid waste to by the most important economic news of the first half of the 20th century, and that was the Great Depression. Here we have 10 years in the 1930s where output falls by about 40%, and unemployment hovers around 25% for many years, and wages don't adjust to resolve the problem. That is, wages simply don't fall. Now, why don't wages fall? There's several explanations. Employers may decide to pay their workers a very high wage to motivate them out of fear of losing their job. The wage may be above equilibrium so that workers get enough to provide healthy meals and health care. It may be that workers get paid more than the equilibrium wage so that the employers can attract highly qualified workers. There are several explanations for the so-called efficiency wage. It may also be that there's a minimum wage law that puts a floor on how far wages can drop. It may also be that labor unions, through their strength, keep wages above equilibrium. But as long as wages don't adjust, as long as they are sticky downwards, that is, as long as wages are pushed up in periods of strong labor demand more easily than they are pulled down during periods of slack demand, this adjustment mechanism doesn't work as rapidly as the classical economists imagine. In fact, it may not really work at all. John Maynard Keynes thought about where the Depression came from. And whenever the classical economists argued with Keynes, when the classical economists said that eventually falling wages would eliminate the Depression, Keynes came back with the quip, yes, in the long run falling wages will solve the problem, but in the long run we are all dead. Keynes said the problem is that wages are sticky, and once wages are sticky, unemployment can persist for long periods of time. The solution, Keynes said, is to stimulate demand. That is, if people would just spend more money, businesses would have to hire more labor to produce the goods and services and thereby reduce unemployment. That is, provide more jobs. Keynes said that in an environment where wages were sticky downwards, unemployment could persist. And once unemployment was persisting in the face of sticky wages, once the bidding mechanism was failing to do the job that the classical economists imagined it would do, then it becomes all about demand. When demand is stronger, whenever people will buy more goods and services, then firms have to hire more labor to produce those goods and services. Then people wind up with more income and they spend more money. So for Keynes, the solution to the problem was increasing demand. And if households wouldn't buy goods and services, that is, if the households were afraid to spend money, never knowing whether they were going to have a job tomorrow, trying to hoard money out of fear of their situation getting worse, if the households kept their savings high and wouldn't spend, then the government would have to step in and fill the gap. It was Keynes's prescription that increased government spending could increase demand, stimulate the economy, and reduce unemployment. That is, put the economy back to work. This was Keynes's view. Now, Keynes's view ignores several things that are going to be important to us in the study of macroeconomics. For example, it ignores adjustment in the overall price level in the economy. There's not really anything Keynes can say about inflation. And he ignores the supply side of the economy, supply shocks, what happens to the economy if oil prices increase. But we're going to be able to learn a lot about the way the macroeconomy works by focusing on Keynes's simple idea. That is, if wages are sticky and prices are not adjusting, then the outcome in this macroeconomy, the amount of employment, the amount of output, and everything else depends on demand. It's all about demand. If the government spends more, the economy is stimulated. If consumers spend more, the economy is stimulated. If businesses spend less, the economy contracts. In Keynes's view of the macroeconomy, demand drives it all. Now we're going to take this insight and build a model carefully around it, using graphs and a little bit of algebra to show how a demand-driven macroeconomy works.